It's been a roller coaster ride in the migration numbers over the last 2 years. They were running at about 240,000 people, adding about that many people to the population of the UK every year before the pandemic.
London actually is quietly dying. I mean,
Police were just called across Great Britain as something massive ripped through the country almost overnight. What people are witnessing right now is mass replace slamming into reality, and that's fast, violent, and impossible to ignore. And the question hanging over Britain is terrifyingly simple. Was this the moment the country finally broke? The chaos in Birmingham started almost like a countdown. By 7:15 p.m., emergency calls were flooding in, shops being looted, windows shattered. By 7:43, radios were crackling with chilling reports. Sectors 8, 9, and 13 are lost. Immediate backup needed. By 8:00, crowds were pressing police vans, screaming, "Stop the boats!" The streets were erupting. Stores emptied, people fled, and for those watching, it was impossible to ignore that something much bigger was happening. It was a structural rebellion, a reaction to a blueprint that many felt was deliberately reshaping the country.
And do you think it's possible to have a debate about immigration, about these incredibly controversial issues without getting carried away with emotions? That's what we're going to try and do here. Just looking at the numbers, I've got so many charts here, just trying to tell you the picture of what's going on with migration. So this is basically showing you how many people are coming into the country, that's immigration, and how many people are going out. And we've got it going back to 2012 here.
And the numbers behind this unrest are staggering. Nearly 1,000. Undocumented arrivals are landing every single day, and projections suggest another 1.6 million could arrive. All of this is being paid for by taxpayers, with costs hitting $8 million a day just to house asylum seekers in hotels. Compare that to the realities faced by veterans sleeping in doorways, pensioners turning off their heating to survive the winter, and families struggling to make ends meet. Machete attacks have surged over 320% compared to 2000 levels, while grooming gangs are back on the streets, operating with near impunity. Every element of this chaos ties directly back to policy decisions that many feel are out of touch with the needs of everyday citizens.
Imagine Northern Ireland scale, or Northern Ireland in intensity, but on a completely national scale. Attacks on public figures, judges, potentially politicians.
The blueprint fueling this storm was exposed by Nigel Farage, and it didn't take long for outrage to ignite. Farage called it a mass replacement plan, warning that the government was engineering a demographic shift in plain sight. And when Starmer went silent for 6 hours after the leak, it only made the public angrier. People began connecting the dots. The mechanism was clear. New arrivals are given housing, benefits, and eventually passports. Once that process completes, they become voters.
The law, I think you can change the law. That's what politicians are there to do. If you want to change the law, change it. Don't bully judges into, publish.
There is an appetite in the UK. Week after week, surveys show that immigration is now the most popular, the most important issue facing British voters.
And a future electorate is created, one perfectly aligned with the current government's vision. Rural communities are paying the highest price. A 20% inheritance tax on family farms is crushing generations of farmers. When a father dies, his son is forced to find hundreds of thousands of pounds, often 10 times more than his annual income, to keep the land. Those who can't pay are losing their farms, and it doesn't end there. Productive farmland is being seized, rebranded as the so-called Grey Belt, and earmarked for new housing developments. These aren't homes for local families struggling to get on the waiting list. They're infrastructure for a new population.
And his argument is this, that first of all, Britain displays many of the signs of being a failed state, such as economic decline, total loss of trust in the police, and a fractious and increasingly extreme politics.
So a bit of an update for you. Just spoke to the local commander. He tells me that the hotel now is being prepared to accept asylum seekers. So the rumours are true. It's a pity that some of the police officers didn't know, some did know, and absolutely furious.
Every acre taken, every field flattened, is a step in a deliberate plan to reshape communities that have existed for decades. The public anger isn't coming out of nowhere. The consequences of these policies are visible everywhere. Emergency services are stretched thin, responding to looting, fires, and attacks. Police lines have been breached in multiple zones, and officers are being forced to retreat while protesters take control. Viral videos of these clashes are exploding online, millions of views in hours. And yet, the government continues to downplay the situation, dismissing concerns as conspiracy theories while the streets burn and citizens feel abandoned.
Feel like the money in our bank accounts at the moment does not keep up with the cost of living, and maybe there's...
Meanwhile, the financial and social contrast is impossible to ignore. The same $8 million daily spent on accommodating new arrivals would cover countless local families, provide heating for struggling pensioners, and fund essential services that are collapsing under pressure. And instead, it is used to give comfort to people who haven't even earned the right to vote yet. Crime skyrockets, social tension rises, and families that once felt secure are now watching their communities transform overnight. The sense of betrayal is almost tangible, and that anger has been spilling into the streets.
They started before Labour came to power, and they've continued on while Labour are on power. Of course, Shabana Mahmood's predecessor, Yvette Cooper, announced some reforms to the migration system, so they are going to make further changes, but it's probably too early to see the effect of those changes in the figures.
And the scale of this shift is staggering. English families average 1 or 2 children, while new arrivals from Africa and the Middle East often average 3 to 7 per household. In just a few years, this rapidly growing population could dominate local elections, cementing political influence that began with housing and benefits. Critics warn that this isn't accidental. Bankrupt rural families, seized farmland, and urban housing projects are all part of a deliberate cycle to engineer a future electorate. The blueprint doesn't just create demographic change, it guarantees it.
And the number of people who are being put up in hotels while awaiting their asylum claims, that's at 36,000. And that's wobbled around a little bit in the last year, so it's hard to kind of tell just from the latest rise. You really need to look under the figures at what's driving the demand for hotel accommodation to get a sense of whether they're going to meet their pledge.
By the time Starmer finally responded, the public was already past listening. People weren't reacting to a single policy. They were reacting to a visible, tangible pattern of displacement and replacement. Farmers see their land taken. Pensioners see their heating denied, and yet millions are spent on new arrivals. Every action reinforces the idea that the government prioritizes imported populations over its own citizens, and that is the fuel behind the unrest sweeping across Britain.
These are probably slightly more worrying numbers for the Home Secretary, because we've seen about 111,000 people claim asylum in the UK in the last year. That's a record, up again on June, up again on the figure before Labour came to power.
The streets, the riots, the chaos, it all points to one central truth. The mass replacement plan is a full-scale disruption of society. Emergency calls, shattered storefronts, viral videos, rising crime, and bankrupt farmers are all symptoms of a system that feels rigged against the people who have built the country. And as long as the government continues down this path, these tensions will only intensify. This is more than a political scandal. This is a social fracture that could define Britain for decades to come. By the time night fell, the streets were a mess that made an action movie look tame. Police shields were hammered with shards of glass like they were auditioning for a remake of 300, and officers on the ground were barely keeping up. Body cam footage started leaking almost immediately, and it didn't take long for the internet to erupt.
The falls that we've seen, there's nothing suggesting in the figures that those are going to suddenly bounce back, that we're going to go back up to a level of 1 million people coming in a year.
Within 3 hours, 41 people were arrested, 16 police vans were destroyed, and the city smelled of smoke, tension, and maybe a little regret from anyone who thought they could stay neutral. And here's the kicker. The protesters weren't some faceless mob. They were angry, calculated, and furious because they felt betrayed. They weren't storming the streets for fun. They were storming the streets because every policy, every new tax, every displaced farmer felt like a personal slap in the face. Meanwhile, the media quickly slapped a label on the chaos. Far-right extremists. It sounds neat and tidy, doesn't it? Only problem, the people on the streets weren't rebelling over ideology. They were rebelling over survival, over fairness, over the sense that the very system designed to protect them had decided they didn't matter.
And the story there is, it's kind of mixed, because there are fewer people waiting for decisions. That's down by about a third since Labour came to power. They're processing people faster, they're making more decisions more quickly. But you can't empty the bath if the taps are flowing in faster than they've ever flown.
And then the political earthquake hit. Starmer and Karma unveiled a housing initiative, 1.5 million homes. But hold on, these weren't the homes for people who had been on council waiting lists for years. Nope, these were homes for asylum seekers, fully funded and ready to move in, while local families watched their chance at stability slip further out of reach. Meanwhile, a death tax on family farms meant that when a father passed away, the son had to scrape together hundreds of thousands of pounds just to hold on to the land. And failing that, the farm went under. Critics warned that farmland wasn't just being taxed into oblivion, it was being deliberately seized and earmarked for future development. And they weren't wrong. Parliament itself looked like a circus. English families averaged 1 or 2 children, while new arrivals often averaged 3 to 7. That might not seem like much in a spreadsheet, but multiply it by tens of thousands, and suddenly your electorate looks very different.
They're making more decisions more quickly, but you can't empty the bath if the taps are flowing in faster than they've ever flown. And if you're seeing a record number of people claiming asylum, well, then it's very hard to end that demand. That means you have to put people up in hotels.
The fallout wasn't just political, it was financial and social, hitting ordinary Brits right in the wallet. Rural communities were losing their land, farmers went bankrupt, and fertile fields were being flattened for housing projects dubbed the Grey Belt. Pensioners were freezing in their own homes, while migrants enjoyed 4-star hotel comforts. $8 million a day was being spent to house people who weren't yet even citizens, while veterans slept rough, and local families struggled to put food on the table. Crime skyrocketed to match the chaos. Machete attacks, grooming gangs, women afraid to leave their homes at night. The streets had turned into a nightmare version of everyday life. And through it all, people could see the financial and cultural betrayal in plain sight. They weren't angry at immigrants. They were angry at a system that spent on comfort for outsiders while abandoning the people who built the country. Starmer's long-term 10-year plan collided head-on with a public whose anger was boiling over now. Housing projects, demographic shifts, and policy decisions all converged to create a level of instability Britain hasn't seen in decades. The question looms larger than ever. Is this mass replace simply a policy disaster, or has the nation reached its tipping point?